वेलकम बैक टू माय यूट्यूब चैनल भूपेंद्र ओझा ब्लॉग्स। एक और नया दिन, एक और नई जर्नी और एक और नई शुरुआत सिर्फ और सिर्फ आपके प्यार के साथ। तो गाइस, अभी हम लोग हैं जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल के आखिरी दिन यानी 5वें दिन के ऊपर। तो देखते हैं आज क्या क्या खास होने वाला है। अभी हम लोग चलते हैं डिस्कशन सुनने के लिए, उसके बाद में देखते हैं आज क्या क्या होता है। तो गाइस, हम लोग एंटर होते हैं क्लार्क्स आमिर के अंदर, जहाँ पे जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल जो है वो चल रहा है। एक तरफ बड़ी खुशी का आगाज़ है कि आज हम लोग वापस जो है वो जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल के अंदर आ चुके हैं, और दूसरी तरफ से थोड़ा गम भी है कि आज जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल का जो है वो आखिरी दिन है। मतलब आज के बाद में जयपुर लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल जो है अगले साल ही होगा, मतलब 2023 के अंदर। तो चलिए चलते हैं अंदर और देखते हैं आज क्या कुछ खास होने वाला है। आज कितनी गैदरिंग जो है आने वाली है, क्योंकि आज जो है वो धूप, अच्छी खासी धूप है, और जो पब्लिक की जो गैदरिंग है वो भी काफ़ी कम नज़र आ रही है। तो गाइस, हम लोग चलते हैं। ये जो पेड़ आप देख पा रहे हैं, इस पे लोगों ने काफ़ी सारे जो है वो कमेंट्स लिख के डाले हैं। कुछ अच्छे कमेंट्स भी हैं, कुछ आप पढ़ने लायक नहीं हैं। और ये देखिए, इस पे कैनवास के ऊपर जो है वो सभी अपने अपने विचार व्यक्त कर रहे हैं। किसी ने आँख बनाई है तो किसी ने कुछ और बनाया है। फूलों की क्यारियाँ में जो है वो फूल काफ़ी प्यारे लग रहे हैं। ये देखिए, जो डिस्पोजल गिलास के ऊपर भी जो है वो अच्छी खासी पेंटिंग बना के जो है वो लगाई गई है। और जी हाँ, आप देखिए, हमारा जो है वो यूट्यूब वाला जो कार्ड है वो भी यहाँ पे लगा हुआ है। ये देखिए ये सब आज कल ये सब हटने वाला है, और वापस से जो है वो क्लार्क्स आमिर अपनी नॉर्मल पोजीशन में जो है वो आ जाएगा। इस तरह की जो पब्लिक गैदरिंग जहाँ पे हुआ करती थी वो यहाँ पे बंजर और वीरान जो है वो हो जाएगा। जो नॉर्मल होटल के अंदर जो क्लाइंटेज आता है वही यहाँ पे अवेलेबल रहेगा। तो गाइस, चलते हैं अभी बाज़ार की तरफ, और बाज़ार की तरफ रुख करते ही हमारे चाय वाले भैया की दुकान, जहाँ पे बन मस्का और चाय, बहुत ही स्पेशल चाय जो है वो यहाँ पर मिलती है। भैया हमें अच्छी तरह से जो है वो जान चुके हैं, क्योंकि हमारा आज यहाँ पे 5वां दिन है और हम यहाँ पे डेली जो है वो चाय पीने आ रहे हैं। तो देखिए, ये भूपेंद्र ओझा ब्लॉग्स का जो है वो कार्ड यहाँ पे अभी भी लटका हुआ है। तो हमने जितनी उम्मीद करी थी उतने सब्सक्राइबर शायद हमारे ऐड नहीं हुए इसको लगाने के बाद में, लेकिन कोई बात नहीं, कारवां जो है वो धीरे धीरे आगे बढ़ रहा है, तो बढ़ने दीजिए। चलिए अब चलते हैं अपन फ्रंट लॉन की तरफ।
बनेगा स्वस्थ इंडिया एट फ्रंट लॉन। We'd like to welcome you to first edition presents Noted Grief. Publisher, poet, photographer and founder of the acclaimed independent house Seagull Books, Naveen Kishore was recently awarded the 2021 Ottawa Award for the promotion of international literature. His poems on Kashmir post 5th August are ember-eyed, grieving and hopeful. He writes of the knotted stories of betrayal, mourning, and the thread made red well before the Great Bleeding. His other poems explore themes of revolt, renewal, the act of writing, the weight of memory, and moments of awareness. Ranjit Hoskote is a poet, cultural theorist, and curator. His collections of poetry include Vanishing Acts, Central Time, and Jonah Whale. His new collection, Hunch Prose, is a fierce testament to the urgency of existential contemplation, what affirms humanity. Where is its home in a world knotted by suffering, both salient and silent, one dotted line away from extinction here? Kishore and Hoskote discuss their work and the powerful provoking poetry of grief. Naveen Kishore established Seagull Books in 1982, a publishing program in the arts and media focusing on drama, film, art, literature, and culture studies. Kishore is a photographer who has extensively documented female impersonators from Manipuri, Bengali, and Punjabi theatre practices. Some of these pictures were exhibited as a part of the show titled Woman, Goddess, and more recently in the exhibition Green Room of the Goddess. In 2019, his suite of color images from the Performing the Goddess project were exhibited at the Vancouver Art Gallery as a part of the Moving Still exhibition. Kishore is the recipient of many honors and awards. Ranjit Hoskote is a poet, critic, cultural theorist, and independent curator who is the recipient of numerous awards. His collections of poetry include Vanishing Eggs, Central Time, Jonah Whale, and Hunch Prose. His translation of a celebrated 14th century Kashmiri woman mystic's poetry has appeared as I Lala, the poems of Lal Dier. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to welcome on stage Tabina Anjum. Tabina Anjum is a journalist, media educator, and an internationally acclaimed visual storyteller. She is born and brought up in Kashmir. She reports on politics, gender, human rights, migrant rights, and issues impacting marginalized communities from Rajasthan, and also covers socio-political issues related to the Hindi heartland of India. She presently writes for the Outlook magazine from Rajasthan and is also an adjunct professor with Haridev Joshi State Journalism University in Rajasthan. Tabina Anjum is going to introduce the session. Over to all of you.
Hello, thank you. Before we begin, it's customary for poets and would-be poets to invoke the gods of poetry, and there is also this sort of sense that you belong to a kind of long tradition. And so in that spirit I want to start with two short poems by Ranjit Hoskote, who has just also been awarded the Mahakavi Kanhaiya Lal Sethia Award. And I think it's important to celebrate before we begin the grieving. So thank you. Two poems. The first one is called Sand. In the kingdom of sand, the three-eyed man is king. He measures the dunes by what's left of meteor trail.
Meant for publication. Sometimes I wish I had kept it to myself. But so that's where poetry started, I think. Just as a young person, not knowing what to do with the anger that I was feeling, and finding somewhere the words to articulate them. But I also think there was the immense influence of somebody like Kamala Das, who was so growing up, a lot of things. You still can access politics, you can still access news, you can still access political movements. But you still don't know how to access what it means to feel desire in a woman's body. What it means to inhabit this woman's body. And I think that reading someone like Kamala Das also gives you the go-ahead to be a poet. It also tells, okay, this is a fraternity you want to be part of. This is who I want to be. I think there were definitely influences.
I mean, there's a very strong literary tradition of the poetry of protest, and I think that's also what you're kind of referring to here. I wonder if, do you think all art, including poetry and maybe even specifically poetry, is political?
All my art is political, so I would like to start on that note. But I also think that if you are like today sitting in India and deciding to write, let's say, about I don't know what is not political. I would say, okay, you're writing about the flowers in this wall, but like writing about nature immediately brings you to the larger question, climate change, like how long are we going to see real flowers? So I don't know, like everything is intrinsically related to what is happening around us. So it's very difficult to, for me at least, to divorce the political aspect of things from the articulation of them in.
Perhaps the most dangerous East-West conflict since the Second World War, and also since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and one which has the potential of triggering a new Cold War. The roots of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine lie very deep in modern history, and perhaps also in the history of the post-Cold War global order which was established, and also the president in 2014. Subsequently, attempts have been made to broker peace through the Minsk Accord, and but however, since February 24th, when the special military operations were announced, and there has been, there have been deaths, civilian deaths, and according to UN estimates, about 2 million refugees have been, people have been rendered homeless. They found refuge in neighboring countries. A stringent set of sanctions have been put in place on Russia, and we are, there is definitely sanctions take a lot of time to get fully implemented. These are not UN-backed sanctions. But we know that, just when the global world was recovering from 2 years of COVID, these sanctions can have a very grave impact on global economy once again. But sanctions again show, and the action which has been taken by Europe, show that they are ready to take the pain, and I think it is a very fast-moving situation. I'm acutely aware of the fact that we are discussing a situation which is happening as we speak. So without any further comments on my part, I would like to open the floor for all my panelists to perhaps first say a few words. Then we will have a little bit of discussion, and I would like to have some questions from the audience as well. Maybe start with you, Alex, and you definitely, we would like to know a little bit about how UK is looking at the post-Ukraine European security architecture, which is definitely going to undergo a lot of change. And now that UK is not part of the European Union. And also a little bit about the refugee issue, because it's becoming a little bit of an issue, I believe, in the UK. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks very much, and hello everyone, and congratulations for staying in the shade. As set up in a Spanish bullfight, there's the Sol and the Sombra seats, and I think you're in the right seats over there. Really excuse me for doing this, but special operations, as in the famous Tolstoy novel Special Operations and Peace, I think we're talking about here. This is an invasion by an autocracy of a democracy for kind of really absolutely no justifiable reason at all. And that's what it is. And I think we kind of had to accept. It's a big test of the imagination, because there hasn't been one of those for a while. But
I never realized that these were poets who were capable of such utterly subversive relationships with the divine.
That's very interesting. Subversive relationships with the divine.
Yes, because I had grown up believing that bhakti meant devotion.
Right.
And I thought devotion simply meant longing for this God. this unattainable, sometimes elusive, in the love poems that permeate our Bhakti tradition, sometimes an unpunctual male god.
Right, like Krishna. Yes, absolutely.
One who often returns with telltale signs of his lovemaking with other women. About the waiting female, the pining female. And those were images of passivity that I just could not relate to. So I thought this was poetry of a moment and that it wouldn't really speak to me. Until science of the heart. It compels you to live in all those inconvenient crevices that you'd rather otherwise ignore. So the Bhakti poets actually yearn for God, but also argue with God, also quarrel with God, also make love to their gods, also eat their gods, also dispense with their gods, and still continue on their spiritual journey.
You have a book called Eating with God?
Eating God.
Eating God. Wow. Okay. Okay, now I want to just go a little back where you spoke about the kind of, the tearing open of your heart and becoming aware of, spaces within you that were not comfortable, right? I found that, as you sort of move deeper inward, it's like
It was over 55 years ago. I've been writing columns for 50 years. So I don't quite remember exactly what I felt. I guess I felt that kind of acknowledgement, that kind of love, kind of recognition from the readers and no one else. And if you have an editor who has sufficient faith in you, especially for a book, it makes it all really worthwhile. But to say it was a cakewalk, certainly not. I had the most merciless reviews anyone writing in Southeast Asia could possibly have received. And Reuters did a story of the record number of the worst reviews any writer has received. And that was for my first book, which continues to sell well and continues to be a bestseller 40 years later. So I guess I must have done something right, but believe me, the last thing, this is because you are young, beautiful, bold and wonderful. You are. And just own it, Just own it. And don't be apologetic for anything you ever say, ever, in any platform. It's not easy, I won't say it's easy at all. But if you can survive that first hiccup and that first little hump, and you know within yourself, you feel confident enough that I have opted for something, this goes with the territory. And if the heat gets too much, you don't have to be in that kitchen, But it's not easy. It's not easy, and the critics can be harsh. And my one word of advice to you, as a very young and beautiful lady, never pay the slightest attention to what your contemporaries say. Honestly, listen to people your own age who may be not in the same situation as contemporaries who want to become writers but have not quite succeeded, or any of them. Listen to maybe older people, but mainly listen to your own voice and find your own truth. And have the courage to say, I will stand by that regardless. So contemporaries can be vicious. So to go back to that question, the earlier one, which was a very charmingly sexist comment, but we'll let it go. So one of the first reviews, which then set the tone for reviews to follow, came from a contemporary and a writer himself, who headlined his piece, "Her looks sell her books." So every time, and at age 74, I encountered the same line. Last week, in someone reviewing my latest book, which is Lockdown Liaisons, again the same old, repetition of "her looks sell her books." To all these men out there, especially the men, I always wish them well and say, let's hope your looks will also sell your books.
Shilpa, you've been a pioneer in many things. The things that you were writing in the 90s were groundbreaking, were incredibly progressive for the times. And as you pointed out, mindful sexist comments. What we've seen happening today, what was once progressive in the 90s may not be progressive for the 2020 models. And you've been writing for a very long time. how do you ever look back at some of your work and how do you feel content with it? Are there things you might want to change?
I have a little trick which I can share with you. I never reread anything that's published and that's written because I'm already on to something else and something else and something else. And I find that's a bit of a waste of an exercise, it's a waste of your time and energy because you'll always find something that's terrible. I mean, every time I read, if I'm forced to read, do a reading at a book club or something, I cringe and I say, oh my God, did I really write that? How dreadful. I could always have written it better. So it consumes you in a way that sometimes inhibits you from what you want to say then. What I said then was relevant then. I stand by every word of it. But that was 50, 40, 30, 20 years ago. What I'm saying today is relevant to me and my readers now. So I don't have to look back, and I never do, because life itself is fragile and short, and the pandemic, if it has taught us anything, it's to curate your own life in a way, edit your own life and your memories in a way that they're not a negative energy force. So you get on with things, you get on to the next thing, you feel positive. And I look forward to every new column, every new book, anything, because instinctively they will know that, this is authenticity. This is not someone, it's not a poser, it's not someone assuming some kind of a position to placate some political group or some social group or even their friends and family for that matter. So that level of confidence has to come from within. It's got to be your inner voice. Only listen to that, and only then will you be able to communicate what you wish to say. Those who get it, get it. Those who don't, well, it's too bad.
I want to, let's talk about...
Felt extremely strongly that women in our society in particular, I can't comment on other societies. I happen to be in India, I live in Indian, and I'm very proud of that identity. But in our society, women are expected to be somehow sexless, They should have no desires. And if they do have desires, keep those desires to yourself, keep them under wraps, shut them under a carpet. But on the surface, you have to be chaste. When I read a very telling comment by a retired High Court judge who had his own very original theory about how peacocks reproduce. And he said that do not reproduce the way other birds and other creatures on earth do. They shed tears. And those tears are drunk by the peahen, and that's how the next generation of peacocks actually come forth into this world. I mean, they would enjoy the experience.
गाइस सेशन जो है वो ख़त्म हो चुका है। राइट साइड में आप देखिए फुल सर्कल, जहाँ पे बुक्स का जो है वो कलेक्शन यहाँ पे फुल अवेलेबल है। यहाँ पे आके आप बुक्स जो है वो परचेज़ कर सकते हैं। अभी हम लोग चलते हैं वापस बाहर की तरफ, क्योंकि अभी दूसरे सेशन में जो है वो 15 मिनट्स का जो है वो ब्रेक है। तो अभी चलते हैं वापस जो है फेस्टिवल मार्केट की तरफ, और देखते हैं मार्केट में और कुछ क्या ख़ास आया है, जिससे कुछ शॉपिंग करने का भी जो है वो यहाँ पे हमें आइडिया मिल जाएगा कि यहाँ पे क्या चीज़ जो है माइट बी पॉसिबल कि आज आखिरी दिन है तो हमें कुछ डिस्काउंट में जो है वो चीज़ें मिल जाए। ये हम लोग आ चुके हैं जो मेन क्लास अमेरिका एंट्रेंस है उसके पास। काफ़ी खूबसूरत चेहरे जो है वो देखने को यहाँ पर मिल रहे हैं। चारों तरफ जो है वो मीडिया के लोग जो है वो फैले हुए हैं। हमने भी मीडिया वाले भाई से रिक्वेस्ट किया कि हमारा भी फ़ोटोग्राफ जो है वो आप ले लीजिए, तो उनका जो आंसर देख के जो है हम लोग भी सरप्राइज़ भी हुए और हंसी भी आई। ये वाज सेइंग कि आज की डेट में ग्लैमर बिकता है। आपको यदि आपका फ़ोटो हम डालेंगे हमारे पेपर के अंदर, तो आई थिंक जो है पेपर बिकना बंद हो जाएगा। ये देखिए गाइस, यहाँ पे जो है अपना खुद का प्रोग्राम भी जो है वो बच्चे जो है वो मिलके कर रहे हैं। गिटार पे जो है वो अब ये धुन छेड़ी जा रही है, ये दोस्ती हम नहीं छोड़ेंगे।
So I'm going to read a very short little poem, which is about migration, migration up from Africa. The awful stuff that happened after 9/11 meant that every country was controlling its borders much more carefully, and a new stamp on migrants' forms was created, LOC, lack of credibility. And this is the kind of thing that happened. It was a very cruel moment, and the cruelty of stages of migration was only gone in hot. So I'm just looking for it. It's called Purple Ink. Purple ink. Too ashamed to even half tell the young woman in spectacles tapping a purple barrow on a desk exactly what the soldiers did to her, each versatile in his turn. She gets wrong, date your mother was born, and sees a stamp, the colour of desert night, descend on her file. So one of the things this book is about, one of the arguments of it, is we are all from somewhere else. We were all migrants once. Migration created the world. We don't know how the first cell got here, but it came from either outer space or under the sea. And when it got here, it started to spread. Migration created history. It created every civilization. And so this is a plea, really, for the naturalness of migration and how strangers should all be honoured. First cell, born in a deep sea vent, synthesized
why and how this was commissioned. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Bhupendra. In terms of why the British Council commissioned the research, in terms of our work in arts and culture and strengthening our work in the creative economy, we have three kind of key areas: expression, enterprise and exchange. It seems that all three are key: exchange, enterprise and the third, which has now escaped me, were part of this research to really understand what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. Because whilst we understand that writers, publishing, literary agents, working in India, working with writers in local languages, there are many languages that have been translated.
तो गाइस ये है बाज़ार, जिसे फेस्टिवल बाज़ार का नाम दिया गया है। और यहाँ पर सूरज की रोशनी इतनी तेज़ है कि बहुत ही कम पब्लिक जो है यहाँ पर अवेलेबल है। हमने कुछ दुकानदार से बात करी तो आज वो भी मायूस हैं, क्योंकि आज फुटफॉल जो है वो एक्सपेक्टेड जितना था कि लास्ट दिन के ऊपर इतना फुटफॉल आएगा, उतने फुटफॉल जो है वो नहीं आया, जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ इतना सूरज का जो तपन है वो इतना तेज़ है कि यहाँ पर हर आदमी के हाथ में या तो कोल्ड कॉफ़ी है या आइस टी है या कोल्ड ड्रिंक है। तो गाइस गर्मी जो है वो धीरे धीरे तेज़ होती जा रही है, आप भी ध्यान रखिए गर्मी का। और ये देखिए यहाँ पर हम लोग वापस जो है वो स्टेशन की तरफ हमें जाना है, क्योंकि सेशन जो है वो फिर से स्टार्ट होने वाला है। अभी ये देखिए, ये है क्लार्क्स आमिर की जो है वो बिल्डिंग, कितनी प्यारी बिल्डिंग है और काफ़ी 5 स्टार कैटेगरी का जो है ये होटल है। और यहाँ पर डेलीगेट्स ही यहाँ पर अमूमन जो है वो ठहरते हैं। ये जो क्योंकि ये होटल जो है वो बिल्कुल एयरपोर्ट के नज़दीक है। अभी सेशन में कुछ टाइम है तो बाज़ार के आसपास ही जो है हम लोग घूम रहे हैं। काफ़ी युवा टीनेजर्स जो है वो यहाँ पर आए हुए हैं, जो कि आई थिंक कॉलेज स्टूडेंट हैं, और ये भी लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल का जो है वो आनंद लेते नज़र आ रहे हैं। गाइस फिर से हम लोग आपको दिखा रहे हैं यहाँ की फुलवारी, यहाँ के टेंट 1, 2, 3 जिसका डिटेल हमने आपको हमारे पहले ब्लॉग के अंदर बताया था कि कहाँ पे कौन से टेंट में क्या क्या चीज़ फैसिलिटी अवेलेबल है।
The feeling behind my eyes, you stood out 'cause you were in red. Then, against my intentions, I let you turn me violet instead. Summer high, met you in August, New York, back to my cold apartment. Distance sucks, but at least I'm still with you. White out skies, middle November, you and I, flights to wherever. I don't mind, as long as it's with you, as long as it's with you.
I'll come to you. I'll come to all of you. Who was the lady in the front you said you wanted me to? Are we somebody?
There was this group here.
Who?
And
You asked? All right. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So yesterday I had a talk with my teacher and he was explaining me about Gandhiji, and he said that
You need to hold the mic closer.
He said that Gandhiji was not a structural person. He did not give structure to the country, but he gave a vision. Nehruji gave that structure to the country. Nehruji, post-independence, India was what? India was in rags. India was in shacks. But Nehruji gave that skeletal body to the country on which today we are standing, on which today we are proud of. Anything from Shazia ma'am or the man sitting there, sir, can't we thank Nehruji?
We get your question. I imagine they would say the structure was not in India's best interest, so we'll ask them.
Yes.
All right, Shazia, there were some questions.
So, two answers. Yeah. So, I don't know, some gentleman said in a very clipped manner, mizzle me, you owe your presence here to secularism. Well, yes. So I would like to say to the gentleman there, Mr. whoever you are, I was talking about Nehru per se. I was not questioning secularism. And secularism for me does not mean succumbing to a Muslim vote bank and being discriminatory to Muslim women per se, and it means that you do not, I'm very grateful that ghungat and practice of sati is done away with, but I also wished
that so-called secular parties did something like the Triple Talaq bill that has just happened now and did not overturn the version that Shah Bano case verdict what happened in 82. I wish they did not did that. I wish the secular parties cared less about the victory of pathetic and filthy vote bank politics. Muslims are not vote banks. We are not minorities. We are equal stakeholders in country's progress. So, sorry, we are not members of a community. We are.
All Indian Air Force was not used in 62. We asked the Americans to use their Air Force instead, etc. Would you like to correct some of those or counter them? One of you? Professor, you're probably the best placed. You speak on Goa. All right.
About Goa, before Ravi says something, let me remind the audience that Goa was a Portuguese territory, not a colony. In international, there is a difference between a territory and a colony. And Portugal was a member of NATO, according to province. And according to NATO agreement, any attack on any province of Portugal, that is Goa, would be considered an attack on NATO. That a lot of diplomatic preparation was needed, and Nehru did it. Nehru supported, with this view in mind, Nehru supported Nasser on Suez Canal controversy. As a result, when Goa liberation took place, Suez Canal was closed for European forces trying to enter Indian waters. So things in a democracy, when you are a prime minister and not a scholar of WhatsApp University, you think and act differently. That is about Goa. Now about other things, nobody here is saying that Nehru did not commit mistakes. The mistakes are committed only by only two kind of people in this world. One who are not born and two who are dead. All other commit mistakes. But when you judge somebody, when you evaluate somebody historically, you evaluate him in a holistic manner, not in a piecemeal manner. I am a good scholar, I am a bad scholar is not evaluated by my performance in this debate. It is evaluated on the basis of whatever I produced till date, good or bad. So similarly, when we are talking of Nehru, we are talking of independent India, we are talking of many prime ministers after Nehru. Let us look at the challenges, let us look at the vision. Somebody was talking of democracy. It's a very important point to recall. And the credit goes not only to Nehru but all his colleagues, including Ambedkar and Sardar Patel. Let me remind the audience